Welcome to the CLI-ALPMA Innovation and Legaltech Week. I'm Silvia Coulter, and I will be co-presenting with Mark Medice, one of my partners at LawVision. And in the session today, we will talk about business development in the next decade. So just a little bit of background on who we are. You can all certainly read our slide here, but we both have been involved in the legal industry for many years. Me, probably I'm a little older than you, Mark, so probably a little bit longer.
Oh, no, you're younger, just kidding. We don't know for certain, right? But
That's right, that's right. But at any rate, we are both principals at LawVision, which is a global consulting firm specializing in all things strategic planning and the practice management of law firms. And so we're very happy to be with you here today, and thanks for joining us. So we wanted to start out, law firm business development in the next decade. That's a very big topic, isn't it? Yeah. And given that we just got slammed with COVID-19, it was a big business interruption, but nevertheless, business continues, and so does competition and the changes in somewhat mature industry. And so where we are now and where we're headed, this chart is really just depiction of that. And so historically, we've been conducting market research more informally, I would say, Mark, client surveys, certainly some internal studies on partner needs and firm needs, and less so law firms conducting market studies. And we're starting to see that really pick up significantly in terms of the research and the data to support the overall business development / sales plans. And then that information ideally feeds into a plan, and with mission and goals, product and service development. And Mark is going to talk a lot more about data analytics and pricing and things like that, but also building strategic alliances. While there's a lot of competition in the marketplace, there's a lot of opportunity to build strategic alliances. And then that coupled with in-house training. So that's our planning side, informed by data and research. And again, we'll talk about what's changed in that research and data. And then that gets communicated back out to the market. So ideally, this is a marketing and business development cycle that pretty much has never changed over time. It was all adapted from the military, believe it or not, strategic planning. And so this will be a similar cycle for as long as the firm is in business, frankly. It's just within these boxes what changes and how much more sophisticated these activities will be, one of which is client development, personal selling, cross-selling, and what we call strategic account management, commonly called key client planning. And so, Mark, these things are going to change within this cycle, and they'll just mature in the way firms start to collect data and analyze data and so forth when they put their plans together.
Yeah, and I think this is a fantastic way to begin today's discussion, Sylvia. And if you really think about it, 2020, as we all know, we're almost tired of talking about the effects of 2020. But there's a lot of things that are coming out of 20 that I think will potentially impact the trajectory of many of these ideas and many of these plans. If you look at some of the statistics, one of the first things that major law firms did in 2020, when they anticipated some significant headwinds that in some cases actually came to fruition, but in other cases, many law firms were quite surprised about how successful they were. But one of the first things they did was cut their business development expenses. So depending on what survey you're looking at, many law firms cut their business development and marketing expenses by upwards of 50% or more. I'm not sure that was the right decision. I'm not sure it was the best decision. But I think coming out of that environment, what law firms have also done is they've learned what they can do and how important technology and data will become. And so as we start to think about this framework, Sylvia, I just wonder if number one, notwithstanding some of the challenges some folks might face with regard to budgets, there's a greater opportunity for us to think more expansively about what you can do and the importance of business development and the formality that goes along with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, we say that in order to really build a strong go-to-market strategy, using history to plan the future can be very informative. We don't want to rely on history in the sense that this is the way we've always done it and it worked so far, so let's continue to do the same, but rather let's use some historical knowledge and data and build on that to plan the future. And so one of the things we recommend, and we're getting a little tactical here in terms of where things are heading and how you can plan for the next decade, is to review up to, we say 5, could be 7. We just worked with a firm and it was probably 7 years of financials, and basically assess where did 80% of the firm's revenue come from, both on the client side and the practice side. And so for this particular firm we just helped, 84% of their revenue came, and they had, I think, I want to say something like 15,000 clients, which is a pretty big number, obviously. 84% of the revenue came from 240 clients, which is a pretty amazing statistic and was very shocking to the firm. And that allowed the firm, and we really helped them do this pretty manually, so you can be pretty manual about how you review this. Literally went to every single client of those 240 clients to their website and said, where is the client? What is the client saying their business is all about? And what industry they say they're in. And so, you created a pie chart and saw that X% was in financial institutions, X% was in traditional healthcare, another percent in life sciences with a strong segment in medical device, and then another percent in manufacturing. So if we were being strategic about where we're focusing our business development activities in the future. And Mark, and some of this is where you might want to, how you might want to acquire new firms or merge with other firms or open new markets. This is the business you're in, right? And for the last 7 years, these big market segments represented 84% of the firm's revenue. And similar stories when you do this analysis, firm over firm, regardless of size. This was a firm with 750 lawyers. And so really starting to refine the go-to-market strategy using data to inform that strategy is going to be key. And it doesn't mean leave out all the other practice areas. It just means let's really focus on servicing these markets.
Yeah, very interesting. Can I comment on this slide, Silvia?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, and I could not have said it better, of course, but just to add a few ideas to this, when we have helped firms think about this, and it sounds like it wasn't just the 80-20 rule in your case, it sounds like it was the 99-1% rule with regard to the 240 clients out of the 15,000. There's a couple of questions that we always like to ask in the context of using historicals to project the future. Number one is, had you looked at your plan, prior to those past 5 years, did you live the outcome that you actually set out to achieve? In other words, did you sort of operate with a random walk, or did you actually achieve the goals that you want? Because that will additionally inform the kinds of targets and goals that you set out now, and inquire about the processes you have in place in order to achieve them going forward. And many firms have been very successful with a very informal type of strategy. So it is an interesting question. And again, every firm has the option to sort of pursue rigor in that kind of formal approach than others, but it is an interesting question. The second thing I'd invite folks to think about is to the point about the 80-20 rule and 80% of your profits or revenues or so forth coming from 20%. Also explore the idea of client rotation, meaning in any given year over the past 5 years, Were they different in year 1 versus year 4 versus year 5? And why is that? And again, did that have anything to do with intent and purpose and approach to how you went to market?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent points. And then you can use the firm's existing revenue growth opportunities to continue to plan the future by looking at maybe the second 100 or even the top 500 clients, or even if you wanted to go to 1,000 clients, I don't know, you'd want to do 15,000 clients and see, how those follow those market segments that were identified. Here's another way, I'm going to go here. Here's another way to look at this, because the first question people have always, Mark, is, but where does that leave my practice? If we're targeting X, if this target market, where's that leave my practices? And so this is just how a depiction of what that sort of targeting produces. So everyone, these are all alias names here. And the example we're using is a growth ramp example. This could be a circle, and it could be a project for a big real estate or energy client or something. But as you look at all of the things required to bring an energy plant online, or to help a company get financing for a big real estate project, or in this case example, from beginning to exit strategy, look at all the practices. I mean, this is right across the firm. Everybody's involved in this strategy. So we're not leaving anybody behind, but rather we're saying, here's what this need, if we're really penetrating this market. And there's a lot of research out there now that shows if you're in a client organization in 4 or more areas, the likelihood of that client continuing to offer more opportunities to that firm is very high, and continuing to retain that client as a good client is very high. And so we would recommend, here's your strategy for growth as well. If you're going into new markets, you want to support those practices and those targets that the firm is already very strong in. If we want to hire laterals, where are we weak in terms of what our clients need? And so this, here's your growth strategy over the next decade in terms of turning the firm a little bit more outwardly focused than inwardly focused, Mark. And I think you're starting to see that more with the analytics that you're helping clients with in terms of the data they're looking for.
Indeed. No, I love this chart. I think, and as you say, you could probably visualize this chart in a number of different ways, but there's actually a book, I'm not going to remember the authors, it came out of Forrester Research about 5 years ago, that dovetails quite nicely with what you're saying, Silvia, called Outside In. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the whole premise of the book is about orienting, and this is not just for law firms, this is about how any organization, whether it's professional service or manufacturing or what have you, goes to market. The more you begin to orient your production processes, your service processes towards the way the client is thinking about the world, the more you will be oriented to understanding how to package what you do and the value add that you provide to the client. So when we think about, for example, simplistic, and they don't have to be simplistic, but sometimes they can come across as simplistic ideas like cross-selling. The idea isn't just a cross-sell so your firm can be successful, but the more natural way that falls out is if we are properly anticipating the needs of the client, which this little ramp up does a fantastic job in doing. So it's not just that, S. Collins over in commercial finance is interested in getting to work or having their team get to work, but it's also a natural byproduct of the fact that we know that the client is probabilistically likely to need those services at that point in time. So ideally, in the most theoretical context, folks will often say, well, it'd be nice to be in the office and let the client know about an issue they have before the client knows it. Sort of that proactivity, that horizon spotting that people refer to.
Absolutely.
Really
I'll go back to that slide I jumped over and just to say, again, review the balance of the firm's clients and assess and match that up. And And these are competitive, tough times right now. You brought up a good point in the beginning, Mark, that the first thing that got cut were tons of budgets, marketing budgets. They got slashed in firms due to COVID and any anticipated further interruption of the firm's businesses. And yet this is, if in some ways it says to me that firms were not super focused on a really refined strategy. And so therefore, all of these expenses seem to be unnecessary and unfocused somewhat. And so now I think maybe there could be a little bit more attention in this direction. So in the future, we don't see that kind of cut, but it's rather, this is necessary to support our growth strategy. And that's what we're really talking about here. So it's, prioritize the firm's resources, review the time and billing records to assess activities charged to sales, and then analyze the spend, right? And so I think when cuts came this year, this slide speaks directly to that. We didn't have a lot of this information. I mean, it's there, but it was all in a very rough format, right? And so it's sort of willy-nilly dollars. We need to go to this conference. We need to do this presentation. We need money for that. Now with a refined strategy, look at the time and billing records. You can hire summer associates to do, summer associates, or you can hire summer MBA students to do these kinds of things. And what's being charged to marketing, and are these dollars, and is this supporting our go-to-market strategy? Is this supporting our long-term, where we want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years is a long way out. But if we start down this path, we could refine it. And it also tells a story about saying no when we have to say no sometimes to expenses that don't make sense, because again, they're not supporting the long-term strategic direction of the firm. So this is one way to do that. The information is all there. Analyze the spend. What do we keep in support of our new go-to-market strategy? And what do we say no to? And that's not always easy to do, but that's another, a lot of what we're talking about is really harnessing some of that data that's already in the firm.
Super.
And so getting to data, I'll turn it over to you, Mark, for a little bit more on that.
Yeah, talk about that. And just one of the carryovers from last slide is, I encounter this idea meaning what is any role or what is any function worth in a law firm? I was talking outside of business development with a practice management chief of a major firm in the United States, and they were looking to hire a new pricing manager. And we got into this discussing what the ROI of hiring a new pricing manager would be. That individual actually came up with a value of, I'd let you guess, but it'd probably take too long, but of $7 million, right? Well, think about it. If we have business development expenditures, whether they're in the form of people or whether they're in the form of investments in technology or what have you, if we can start to formulate an ROI and really connect those activities to results, the better off we are. That all transitions into this discussion very briefly about data. And for many of you, this is not a new edition of the Harvard Business Review, but a year ago this time, pre-pandemic, I remember speaking about some of these ideas at Marketing Partner Forum, wherever that was last year. It seems like millions of years ago rather than just 1 year. The idea of moving to a different plateau or level of the utilization of data is so important. Now, if we take a step back for just a moment and say, well, don't we all use data? Of course. And in fact, that's true across most facets of the law firm, whether you're talking about the finance function, whether you're talking about case assessment and disputes resolution, whether you're talking about deals, whether you're looking at business development. Data is being used, but the challenge that the series of articles that came out of this edition of the HBR review talked about was, how do we actually start to think about it from the standpoint of competitive advantage? And in order to get there, they offered a number of different frameworks for how you can go about systematizing and formalizing things. And that's not to say that everything needs to be overly formalistic or everything needs a workflow or an official process. But what it is saying is that we want to move beyond the casual. We want to move beyond anecdote in some cases and really start to think about which work streams are important. So if you go ahead and proceed to the next animation, Silvia, one of the analyses that came out of one of the articles talked a little bit about how you go about developing loyalty. And one of the premises of this article was that many companies, and this was not just for legal, this was across all industries, but one of the fall downs of many companies in this article was that they spent way too much time focusing on just pure financial results or pure stock returns or something that had a very strong orientation towards P&L. And what they articulated was the limitations of being able to achieve the kind of success that you could achieve if you don't reorient yourself to loyalty and customer value. And it's almost back to the Peter Drucker quote. The Peter Drucker quote, if many of you are familiar, is that the purpose of a business is not to generate a profit. A profit should be a natural byproduct of serving a client. So Peter Drucker had said long time ago that the purpose of business in his mind was actually to create a customer. So then that would naturally lead you to doing data analysis along the lines that are framed out here on this chart, where you might actually be able to use data and you might be able to put some value on your existing clients or customers as it's articulated here. And moreover, you could further segment those, just as Silvia had articulated a moment ago about different segments of your client base where you have the best opportunity to match up with them and serve to your strengths and so forth. So we won't go into the depths of these particular models, but I did want to at least bring them forward so that we could at least start to get our arms around how we might go about, thinking about it. But very few firms that I interact with have models that frame out their customers or their client opportunities in this way. Sylvia, do you see anything along these lines?
There's been a few that have attempted, but I think there's going to be a greater emphasis now. And one of the reasons to have loyal clients is loyal clients are less likely, not definitely, but less likely to want to put price pressure on the pricing of the legal services. There's always going to be some pressure around that, clearly. But loyal clients are less likely to change law firms. They're less likely to change service providers, right? So building loyalty into those relationships is really critical. And it's virtually impossible to do that without metrics, right? Without data. Companies that have done that very well, that a number of law firms have modeled after or tried to model, at least have been going to training at these organizations, include the Four Seasons hotels globally, the Ritz-Carlton Corporation, some big brands where they've got a loyal client base, and firms, and because they are service industries, firms are starting to adapt some of their customer value and loyalty strategies. But nonetheless, we're starting to see, tip of the iceberg on this.
Right. And again, we don't want to overanalyze it, but just think of the benefits that accrue from doing something like this. And you can actually pivot over to the next slide as well, where, and we touched on this in the earlier part of today's discussion, which is, where are the lion's share of your fees coming from? And what this analysis was meant to describe is, okay, but even over that 5-year horizon, and this is a different analysis than what Sylvia was describing with that firm. This actually was just an example from the HBR article. But their point is a really interesting one if you actually look at the splits on this particular chart, is to say, well, so for those clients that have been with us for 5 years or more, what would be that target, at least for clients that we think sort of fit in that key client zone, if you will. And the point isn't so much about whether this particular cohort analysis is the right one or not. The point is really that you should have a strategy, and you should actually be executing a strategy so that if you actually have certain funds by which you can invest and you think about it along the lines of having an ROI, that you can be just a lot smarter about those decisions. And moreover, you might illuminate some opportunities that you just wouldn't have identified before. So when we get into data strategy, and you can go ahead to the next one there, Silvia, unless you have a comment on this one. You know, oftentimes when I have a more in-depth discussion about the use of data, and really that's where I would sort of describe it in the context of things. There's a lot of discussion these days about, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning and so forth. Those are important things, but let's just throw them to the side of the road for today's discussion. Most of you who are participating on this call are way more expert at the important questions that you need to answer to be successful with your clients than any data scientist will bring you there. The data scientists really just bring you a little bit more ammunition in order to get to those answers in a more effective way. But it is amazing what happens when you do that. So we just build this out. And as you would go thinking about developing out a data strategy with your client base, you know, how would you answer questions about who are your top performing clients today? And what does that really mean? Is it the clients that bring you the greatest amount of fees in a given year? Or are they the ones that are contributing the greatest amount of profitability? And by the way, are they the ones that you're targeting on purpose? Or are they the clients that are sort of just happening in happenstance along the way? These are important questions that data will really start to reinforce. So if we just continue to sort of just build all this out, we've talked about all of these things in our prior slides, but I'll just reinforce that as you start to think about a framework for data in the area of client development, don't just ask, hey, what is the 80-20 rule? Because you'll definitely find it, or the 99-1 rule in the case of many examples we find. But what is your rotation rate? And is your rotation rate and your attrition rate one that you would expect? Do you have any type of indicators about whether your clients are likely to leave you? And leave you cannot just be, hey, we're not going to do business with you, but they also can represent the so-called fade, meaning, hey, we're not going to tell you you're fired, but we're just going to gradually use you less and less and less. And are there any early warning signals that we might use in order to be able to help us get involved before it's too late? So the so-called early warning systems. And so we've been working with a lot of folks to help them think about putting in place early warning systems so that folks might be able to be a little more proactive with regard to the use. And moreover, whenever you have a workflow like that, can it serve as a teaching system for the firms as well? Sylvia, anything to add on that one?
You know, you brought up, you mentioned data scientists, Mark, and I think there are two trends associated with where we see the next decade, how we see the next decade playing out. One is more and more firms are hiring data scientists, and many from industry, and to perform a lot of these analytics, because they're trained, and I'll let you explain their role a lot, you know a lot more about that role than I do, but they're trained to look for these patterns and these and what's going on, and they understand life cycle. I mean, I don't think Amazon or any of the big companies we're all familiar with and have been using quite a lot in the last year would make a move without some of that analysis. And the other trend that we're seeing, and I can talk a little bit more about this briefly, is salespeople. So sales professionals who know how to steal share of wallet, who know how to go out and grab client share, and who know how to compete very effectively in the market. And not that they're out there all by themselves. Sometimes they are, but partnering, teaming up with the partners to really build an effective sales strategy and to go win the business and to retain and grow those important relationships. So acting on the data and acting on the information, and then really building out a successful sales strategy. And that some of the data we've seen in terms of the growth rate of sales professionals is about 7% a year. We've done some studies with Thomson Reuters on that. And so, while some firms will say, over my dead body, we're going to hire a salesperson, and that may conjure up, stockbrokers and other people who cold call all the time. an effective sales professional can be incredibly helpful and valuable to the long-term growth strategy of the firm. And we've seen that in the accounting world, right? It took, well, it's probably 20 years ago that accounting firms really built out that role. And now they've got sales teams pretty much in most of the bigger firms and mid-size accounting firms. But, so data scientists and sales professionals, I think, are a real trend that we'll see grow pretty quickly in the next decade.
No, that's really interesting. And I agree. And I would also say you don't have to, if some of that is I don't know if intimidating is the right word, but just not something that you're wanting to lean forward into. I guess my recommendation would be, number one, take it in small bites, but number two, share the risk. There are other functions. Every function in the firm is going to benefit from data and data utilization. And in some cases, you don't have to go so far. We don't have to get into the semantics or the formal definitions of what a data scientist is, but there's a continuum of skills and expertise required. And in some cases, you don't have to have a full bore data scientist, but you might just benefit from a really great data analyst, or a data jockey that can really do a great job at gathering the data, putting it in a form that will allow you to have really, really good insights. One of the best applications that we use is really just visualizing the data, somebody who can really tell a good story with it. And so I would reinforce experimentation, embracing it, because I do think if we look at the horizon over the coming years, 3 to 5 even, that you're going to see some firms make more significant investments in these areas that I think are worthwhile. And I wouldn't be surprised, especially as we experience new competition in the industry for new roles like business development and sales folks more directly come into the fray as well. So very good.
Absolutely.
Move on. I think the next example with this guy, the last bullet really talks a little bit about those early warnings, which we've covered, so we can move forward. I think the last slide I had related to data was very specifically relating to how would you build a better decision-making process on predicting client attrition. And I won't go into all of the gory details here, but one of the points I wanted to bring out, and one of the slides I'm not presenting today that I often will present in conjunction with this slide, is what signals do you folks currently think of? Usually when we survey audiences, when we're giving presentations like this, we'll ask how many folks have an early warning system for client attrition, and usually less than 10% do. But it usually then leads into a discussion about what attributes or what signals do people look at that might actually predict it. And Silvia, not to put you on the spot, but any thoughts? And I can share with you some, and I think you know some of it because we've shared the research together, but any thoughts that come to your mind about what metrics or what signals would provide an early warning, or a set of signals? It could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 2. Any thoughts about what might give you a signal for predicting client attrition?
Well, I would say, one that you mentioned earlier, Mark, is, are we getting less and less work, right? Or another is what's changed at the client? How many contacts do we have at a client organization? If we don't have 3+, at least 3 or more, and if we don't have contacts at the C level in these organizations, I mean, we're not saying this is easy to accomplish, but very, very important. And that to me is a warning signal. Even if it's a good client, at some point that's going to come into play that the board or the senior leadership of the organization does not know the firm directly or have good contacts. And clearly another one that a lot of firms have been experiencing, Mark, are the requests for proposals. Mm-hmm. To me, that's a warning, because what that gives you, while some firms will say, well, we don't answer those because it's just to show that they did some due diligence. But what we're seeing now, remember the growth that we're going to see pretty quickly in the next decade of sales professionals. A sales professional is going to say, maybe they're entrenched with law firm A, but we now have an opportunity to show our face through this RFP process. And we're starting to see that is an indicator, a sales indicator for data, that there's an opportunity, and the firm could have a threat there, a strategic threat, if they're not careful. So, I mean, those are some, fairly straightforward ones, but clearly those are, and also if a partner leaves, but
Yeah.
client attrition, I think client attrition is happening all over the place because clients they have so many opportunities to consider competition, and also competition to the what we would consider a standard law firm, right, by the ALSPs and other service providers.
Yeah, and so we've just given you a laundry list. There's others, and if you're really interested, we're more than happy to provide you. We've done studies on this, and we have insights about over 20 of those factors. And some of the others are things like, is the client changing the way they pay their bill? Is it slowing down? Are they more likely to resist bills and all that kind of stuff? Now, here's the key. So often when we come up with this laundry list, we're so proud of ourselves as a group, right? Look at us. We came up with 20 signals, to which many firms go, well, if I was going to deploy this would be crazy because I would have to find all this data in all these different places. And here's the good news, I think, is that if you were inclined even to develop the most simplistic type of an early warning system for purposes of client attrition, you don't have to use all 20 of those signals. The real litmus test is, can you find a handful of signals that you can rely on, that the data quality is very good, and that have a truly predictive effect such that you can engage? And it doesn't have to be a fancy visualized dashboard, and it doesn't have to be cosmetically beautiful, but if it provides you with this notion of, hey, I'm getting a really good, true signal that's allowing us to have good conversations with our partners, our lawyers, then that's a good thing. So I will pause on that just for sake of time. But that, you can get one of these processes going in a very practical
Pretty
way
quickly,
without a whole lot of fanfare.
And one way to start maybe is to, outside of having someone like Mark help, is to ask each of the heads of your operational business units. So head of marketing and business development, head of, your CFO, your COO, some other key people, to kind of put down on paper from their perspective and where they touch clients at the firm, what are some things that they would give consideration to. And that just creates a big list, for consideration to refine a little bit once you have all of that. And maybe that's a simple way of starting it, but it's a way of starting it. And then you can become a lot more sophisticated with that. But people are, teams create good results. So using, taking a collaborative approach to this can be very useful.
Yeah, and one last point before we go on, I don't want to get too stuck here, Silvia, but notice what we've just observed by just kind of going through this little exercise. We spent way more time, which is the right thing to be doing, focusing on either the business problem or the opportunity, meaning client attrition, which all of you are foremost experts in. Now, that doesn't mean that we might need to go back and do a regression model or do some kind of fancy model with statistics or, God forbid, machine learning. But the point is that those are supplemental. Those are much less important in order to get started than the quest to actually find out and pursue these problems. These other more fancy things sort of can fold in over the course of time. So I guess the message underlying that is, don't let the fancifulness of the technology get in the way of making a good start on all of this stuff.
Good point. Yeah. And all of what we've talked about so far is basically, this is where things are heading. We're off the starting point. The starting gun has gone off, right? And so firms are hiring sales professionals, firms are hiring data scientists, firms are analyzing client attrition. They're analyzing historical data to build a much more targeted strategic plan and a go-to-market strategy. And so this is happening. We see that over the next 10 years, this is really going to play out in a very strong way. And we'll start to see kind of who are the winners and maybe even losers in this game in terms of the competitive advantage it gives them. Just another data point, and this is, from the sales side, pretty focused, is we see many firms now forecasting and managing sales activities. And, historically, Mark, firms have said, okay, we have this many lawyers times their billing rate, and we hope that this is what the results are if they bill X number of hours. And so, we always say, I think there was a book called Hope is Not a Strategy. And so firms are getting more sophisticated again around managing these business development and sales activities. And so the way to do that is to say, who are our existing clients? At what stage of the process are we at with them for new business? And these stages are from 1 to 5, 5 being closed business. And what's the dollar potential? And depending on the stage, this is called a weighted pipeline in sales. And any sales professional has to live by this monthly in their organization. And so it won't be any different if your firm hires salespeople. They'll know how to do this forecasting quite well, as will any strong financial people who came from industry. The commercial world relies on this. This is what goes to Wall Street, basically, to give you the forecasts. But anyway, so, I would urge to have your directors or chief marketing and business development people start to develop, even again, as Mark just said, you don't have to do some real heavy, sophisticated analysis to get this going. You just requests come in, who's it for? Who's the client we're pursuing? What's the opportunity? It goes down on a forecast sheet. It could be a simple spreadsheet initially. Some firms are implementing strategic sales tools to do this analysis not analysis, but tracking for them. And you can do it by practice. You could do it by office, firm-wide. It's just a good habit to get into, is to start looking at the forecast. And now this is a much better predictor of revenue. And so again, we're starting, it's a way of looking at analytics, sales analytics, to predict our future. So rather than say, well, we did 1 million this year, we did 50 million, or we did $500 million in gross revenue, let's cross our fingers and let's hope that we can up that by X percent. This takes the hope away, right? This is giving you reality when you start to forecast with actual numbers, and you're looking at what's the activity going on across the firm, whether it's RFPs, whether it's business development calls and opportunities and meetings that our partners are running. It's a way to forecast potential, and it's kind of a nice way to look at it, because it lifts the ceiling off the potential, and it's wide open.
Yeah, I love this in the sense that it reinforces the notion of trying to actually execute a strategy or a plan on purpose rather than by happenstance. And the other thing that a technique like this often brings out is really good, relevant conversations. A lot of times people get stuck in a process or a report or data analytics, and they go, oh, it's just for those folks who want to sort of go into a dark room and read a report. but the reality is that if you use data right, or if you use reports like this right, what it really does is it brings the right conversations together at the right time. That's obviously optimal, but that doesn't always happen that way. But that's what you aspire towards. You want to bring people together most relevantly, and that's why you do this kind of stuff. And it's amazing what differences make when that happens.
Absolutely. And again, for those of you who have good contacts at, or your counterparts at consulting firms or accounting firms, go to lunch with them, have a Zoom meeting with them, talk to them about the tools they're using, because they've been doing this for a while now, not years and years, but, certainly 10 to 20 years. So they're a bit ahead of the legal industry in terms of using some of these tools, and they might provide some really great insight. And then, last, This slide looks a little bit busy, but we thought we'd just give you all of the data instead of just all of the information instead of just the headings. And that is, it's an ongoing key client team process. We call it SAM Legal, and SAM is a widely used term in the commercial world. So widely used, in fact, we tried to trademark SAM Legal, and they said no, it's just too generic, common a name across industries. So SAM is strategic account management. And we differentiate, I mean, all the things that we've been talking about today really lead up to a successful SAM strategy on the business development side. And the reason we're saying it's SAM and strategic accounts is because we want you to think about it very strategically. And there is a purpose to these important meetings and these important strategies. And frankly, many commercial businesses and the accounting world and the big consulting firm world use SAM as a strategy, overarching practice plans, department plans, office plans. They say, these are the strategic accounts that drive X% of the revenue of our business. And that strategy needs to be distributed and implemented somehow across our offices and practices. So this is the process and what it looks like. And it's pretty standard. I mean, we've adapted it for legal, but this is a very standard process in business once again, and it's called strategic account management. We will see a lot more of this. And as that sales role evolves in law firms, you will also see strategic account managers. And there are a few firms already dipping their toe in the water on that. And those are individuals who are solely responsible, hired and solely responsible, often teamed up with a data analyst and a project management individual. And their whole purpose is to take this important client of the firm and grow it and partner with the partners on developing that. So this is kind of where the rubber meets the road on all the things we've been talking about today, Mark.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I appreciate you sort of leaving us with this framework. And like one of my themes that I've been offering throughout the course of this is that, see if you can be on a journey. I think our recommendation would be the better firms are implementing these types of frameworks. And even if some of this feels daunting, figure out those early steps. In other words, you don't have to, accomplish all of this in one full bite, but maybe there are some things you do. And in fact, Silvia, as almost a question for the audience, or, from the audience to you is, look, if you can only do 2 or 3 of these things, let's say a firm is really excited about this framework, but they recognize they're not going to be able to put in place 5 sales professionals and new metrics and a SAM program. Any thoughts about how a firm, might pick and choose their journey for commencement on this process?
Boy, that's a good question. There are a lot of key client team programs at firms that have jumped off and failed miserably. They're in their second and third iteration, getting all the partners on board with that, and I think part of that is because the focus was on what else can we sell to the client? What else can we pitch to the client? And that's not what strategic account management is all about, really. So it's take a step back. What are some of the metrics and the data? Look at the prepare side of this, right? It's what we've been talking about, and some of the metrics and data that Mark was talking about. How strong is our relationship? Come up with an initial pool. We say 20, but that's a big number. I mean, I would even back that up to 5. And how are we making sure that we've got buy-in for this and that it supports our overall strategy? So the prepare, just like if you were going to trial or just like if you were going to negotiate a big opportunity, preparation is everything, right? So that's the jumping point. And so we leave you with that. And thank you for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure to spend part of our day with you. And if you would like to receive any additional updates from CLI or ALPMA, please follow them on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, or all three. So thank you, Mark, for co-presenting, and we will see you all again, hopefully in the future.
Very good. Goodbye now.